One of the most controversial aspects of today's culture war has to do with transgender athletes competing against biological females. And one of the most prominent stories about some female high school runners in Connecticut is escalating as the story reads. Female high school runners are suing Connecticut amateur athletic bodies to block transgender athletes from participating in girls' sports, saying, quote, "It's not fair to compete against boys." This case is showing us how the current iteration, modern civil rights law, is untenable. It can't function within itself, and I'll explain why. Now, as most of you know, and we'll read the story, female-bodied individuals, I'm going to be very specific here, so forgive me. I know a lot of people are like, don't use, no, listen. These young females are competing in running against biological males who identify as women. And my understanding is that these biological males have not done any kind of transitioning outside of some social transitioning. So no hormones or anything like that. Quite literally, biological male running against biological female. And lo and behold, the two biological males, the trans women, have won. And I believe they shattered some records. Now, these females are saying it's a violation of Title IX. That is, they are being discriminated against by being forced to run against what they say boys. I'm telling you, very contentious culture war issues. I beg you to please bear with me as I try to navigate the language appropriately. Here's the point. Civil rights law in many states, and I believe in Connecticut, says that you can't discriminate based on gender or gender identity or sex, depending on how they frame it. New York, for instance, says sex and gender identity. So here's the problem. It's been ruled in many courts that it is not gender discrimination if there exists an equal but parallel system for the opposing gender, sex, etc. So if you have a women in STEM club and a man tries to join it and you say no, that's discrimination. But if there's a women in STEM club and a men in STEM club, the argument is there is an equal opportunity for both to join their respective leagues. It would not be discrimination. When it comes to sports, there is men's and women's sports. Therefore, these females are claiming it's discrimination because they're becoming spectators in their own sport competing against males. But now we get to the interesting point of civil rights law when it adds gender identity. You now have one law simultaneously saying it is discrimination towards both groups. So look at it this way. There is no space for these females to compete only against females. Therefore, if in either circumstance they have to compete against males, it's gender discrimination. Technically. But then the issue, so this is confusing, I gotta tell you. The issue is biological males are coming into female sports on the basis of gender identity, saying you can't discriminate based on their identity. In both circumstances, it is discriminatory to the trans women and to the biological females. There is no way to rectify this, I suppose, outside of the courts. So what we're going to need is court precedent setting those limits. And here's where it gets really tricky. I've talked about this time and time again. New York City, for instance, defines gender identity as self-expression for the most part, meaning there's infinite genders. New York officially recognizes 31. Will they have to create 31 leagues in New York if someone sues? I honestly have no idea. Or will they get rid of all leagues based on what I just told you? Like I said, if there's a female and a males, it's not discrimination. But what if males are in all of them and there is no place for females, so will they have to allow females into the male division? It doesn't make sense. Here's where it starts to break down. It's going to be really interesting to see how the courts rule on this for one simple reason. If they side against gender identity and in favor of biological sex, saying the trans women cannot compete in women's sports, that sets the stage for all trans individuals. So when I was talking about New York City, I chose the most extreme example. I said, what if somebody identifies as like a trans otherkin furry, right? So they show up to Starbucks, apply for a job, they get the job, and when they come for their first day, they're dressed up in a giant dragon costume. And I talked to a lawyer about it, and he said, that's absurd. A judge would very obviously throw that out. My question then was, on what grounds would the judge throw it out? Because it's perceivably to that judge illegitimate? Yes. Okay, hold on then. Is it possible to then say, A judge could find literally any trans person to be absurd. Yes, because that's the judge's discretion. And so the point I was trying to make, and first, I was talking to this lawyer because it was a general civil rights lawyer. Wanted to get a generalist view of this outside of the political culture war stuff. And they said that would never happen. Yes, the law does say that it's self-expression, but a judge is never going to allow someone to dress up in a costume or do something weird like that. And I said, who defines costume? Who defines whether or not someone really is trans? If you argue that a biological male putting on a dress and makeup is fine, then where's the line at which it becomes absurd? Now, obviously, I understand someone wearing a weird costume and claiming they're a mythical dragon creature is extreme. It's way beyond wherever that line could be. But what if you slowly start incrementing? At what point will they say this is not legitimate? Because a lot of people who perform like drag, for instance, are extreme caricatures in costume. They wear fake bottoms, so their legs look really, really big and their hips look really, really big. Would they be allowed to say that's not real clothing? The law specifically states you can't be discriminated against based on what you wear. So there's an interesting line, and perhaps it will be set by a judge and people will agree on it. But I don't know where that is. Let's read the story. I'm sorry for ranting for a long time before actually getting to the story. Daily Mail reports, the families of 3 female high school runners filed a federal lawsuit Wednesday seeking to block transgender athletes in Connecticut from participating in girls' sports. Selena Soul of Glastonbury High School, Alana Smith of Danbury High School, and Chelsea Mitchell of Canton High School are represented by the conservative nonprofit organization Alliance Defending Freedom. The organization argues that allowing athletes with male anatomy to compete has deprived their clients of track titles and scholarship opportunities. We can see this is one of the very famous photos of the 2 transgender individuals running and winning. And I think it's important to note, it was at least reported in the past, these 2 individuals are not on hormone therapy at all. They're literally just biological males identifying as female. Quote, forcing them to compete against boys isn't fair, shatters their dreams and destroys their athletic opportunities. Attorney Christiana Holcomb said in a news release. Having separate boys and girls sports has always been based on biological differences, not what people believe about their gender, because those differences matter for fair competition. And forcing girls to be spectators in their own sports is competitively at odds with Title IX, a federal law designed to create equal opportunities for women in education and athletics, Holcomb said. Connecticut's policy violates that law and reverses nearly 50 years of advances for women. And now I want to stop, and this is the big question. There's an argument on one side. It discriminates against women. The argument on the other side, it's discriminatory against people based on gender identity, especially when they say trans women are women. Therefore, which side do you pick? It's 2 different marginalized groups, self-described marginalized groups, arguing that they are further being discriminated against. The law says you can't discriminate against either. I don't know. Pick one. The lawsuit was filed against the Connecticut Association of Schools, Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference, very verbose name, and the boards of education in Bloomfield, Cromwell, Glastonbury, Canton, and Danbury. The Connecticut Association of Schools, Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference, has said its policy follows a state anti-discrimination law that says students must be treated in school by the gender with which they identify. So then what about someone who can't choose what their biology is? Should these women... Well, actually, no, here's the big problem. The biological females are at a distinct physical disadvantage. They can't just decide to compete against males in the other league. They'll lose. So now the safe space created for females because they can't compete at the same level as biological males has been stripped away. I think it's a sound argument. So what do you do? Perhaps the answer is a league, a transgender league. I don't know. Perhaps there should be hormone requirements. Some institutions, I think the Olympics does that. But where you draw the line, it's... I don't know. Don't ask me. This is going to be a messy one for people to figure out. The Daily Mail goes on. The lawsuit follows a Title IX complaint filed last year by the girls' families and the Alliance Defending Freedom with the U.S. Education Department's Office for Civil Rights, which is investigating the policy. The lawsuit centers on 2 transgender sprinters, Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood, who have frequently outperformed their cisgender competitors. The 2 seniors have combined to win 15 girls' state indoor or outdoor championship races since 2017, according to the lawsuit. The 3 plaintiffs have competed directly against them, almost always losing to Miller and usually behind Yearwood. Mitchell finished third in 2019 state championship in the girls' 55-meter indoor track competition behind Miller and Yearwood, so being deprived of a gold medal. Yearwood of Cromwell High School and Miller of Bloomfield High School have both defended their participation in girls' events. Yearwood told the Associated Press in February 2019 that there are many differences among athletes that may give one a physical advantage over another, and that she does not think she has an unfair advantage, saying, one high jumper could be taller and have longer legs than another, but the other could have perfect form and then do better. One sprinter could have parents who spend so much money on personal training for their child, which in turn would cause their child to run faster. But let me just stop you right there. We separate the sexes in sports based on averages, and there is look, I'll put it this way. You know, there's no rule banning women from any major league sport. Did you know that? Baseball, hockey, basketball, football, my understanding at least, for most of them, there's no rule. And women have actually tried out to be kickers for the NFL. Some have gotten close. The problem is you are looking at the top tier, the best of the best of the best. So when it comes to athletics, lo and behold, what everyone knows, at the extreme high end of the spectrum, you have men. They tend to be taller, faster, more fast twitch muscles, etc. Because of that, we have created another division that averages out for the best of women. That's the point. So, I mean, it's odd to me because I know like all of you get it. I don't know in what world these other people live in, but all that's really happened right now is that you've taken people who, you've taken women and you've taken away their space to compete against other women. That's it. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say trans women are women. Fine, whatever. The point is, females have no place to only compete against females. That was the point in the first place. And I'll also point out to address their comment about how one jumper could be taller and have longer legs. Yes, congratulations. Maybe you've just now realized that in basketball, they all tend to be really, really tall. Save for a few exceptions like Muggsy Bogues, who was like 5'3" but could jump ridiculously high. The overwhelming majority of NBA players are really, really tall. And there's some like funny stat where it's like, if you're 7 feet tall, you have a 17% chance of playing in the NBA. Now, why is that? It's because physical differences, and they're all men. Of course, there have been very, very tall women, but they're all men. So the point is, when we're talking about sports and we're talking about the best of the best, guess what? Yes, someone might have shorter legs and then they fall out of the top rankings and they're no longer represented. I guess you want to create a world where everyone is completely equal and only skill determines whether or not you win, right? All right, well, the problem with that is that there's even differences in people's cognitive abilities. But I suppose if you're from one of these blank slate ideologies where you think genetics plays zero role in how people develop, you'll think this makes sense. But it doesn't. It's a mix of nature and nurture. To what degree? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Don't ask me. But there is an obvious mix. Some people are tall, meaning it's easier for them to dunk. There you go. What do you want to do about it? Yearwood's mother said the athlete had no immediate comment on Wednesday's lawsuit. Miller did not immediately respond to a request for comment. I got to say, Daily Mail really needs a copy editor of all the sites I've read. The attorneys are asking the court to prevent the transgender girls from competing while the lawsuit moves forward. Connecticut is one of 17 states that allowed transgender high school athletes to compete without restrictions in 2019, according to transathlete.com, which tracks state policies in high school sports across the country. 8 states had restrictions that make it difficult for transgender athletes to compete while in school, such requiring athletes to compete under the gender on their birth certificate, or allowing them to participate only after going through reassignment procedures or hormone therapies, according to Transathlete. Yearwood and Miller have said they are still in the process of transitioning, but have declined to provide details. Now I'm going to stop here. Guess what? There's a problem in this law. The law isn't about discrimination as a blank idea. It's about men and women. There is a trans man athlete named, I think, Mac Beggs. I could be getting the name wrong. And a lot of people often think this is a male fighting females. No. Mac is female, transitioned to male, and wanted to compete against men. Almost no one would have a problem with that. But because of laws designed to block things like this, it results in Mac, who is taking testosterone, dominating wrestling and beating cisgendered women. The issue is, General discrimination laws about identity do not make sense. Men have distinct physical advantages in athletics, period. A woman, a female who takes testosterone will also gain distinct advantages. This is why you don't see the same stories going the other direction. You don't hear about females who start taking testosterone and then dominating the male field, because biological males will still have an advantage over a trans man. Therefore, the law needs to reflect specifically how men transitioning to women will play out and how women transitioning to men will play out. There can't be a blanket law. And this is the big problem with the current discrimination laws and why it's another reason why this is untenable. You can't simultaneously you can't discriminate against, people based on sex, but you can't discriminate based on gender identity, because then you take away the sex-based bracket, right? But at the same time, I'll read the last of this. You get the point. Actually, I think that is the end of it. Okay. I'm not going to beat a dead horse on this one. You get the point. I don't know how this will play out. All I know is the last point I wanted to make, I'll just make it. The differences in sports cannot be a blanket law about gender discrimination. It has to specify. You cannot allow, men transitioning to do X. You cannot allow females transitioning to do X, because it just doesn't work. But because the law tries to be neutral and equal, you end up with this conundrum. Therein lies the big challenge. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects against discrimination based on sex. But there's going to be a whole slew of exceptions popping up, and exemptions. And it's going to get really, really confusing. Would it be discrimination if a firefighter said, I'm not going to hire a woman who's short? What if they said they're discriminating based on your height? Honestly, don't know. I don't know how this plays out. I just know that we created women's sports, like we as a society, on purpose because of averages. It makes no sense to now disrupt that. And their argument makes no sense either. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. youtube.com/Timcast. It is a different channel, and I will see you all there.